Hello and welcome. Today we have Parth Shah for a very special conversation with us around careers in public policy, education in the broader policy space in India, and his incredible 3-decade-long journey in this space overall. Parth, thank you so much for being at the time. I know you're very busy. It means a lot to us and audiences. Maybe we'll quickly just get started with, and because we'd love for you to give a picture to audience of your career right in the broader policy space. How did you get started here, right, as a professional over the last 3 decades or so?
It's wonderful to be with you, Yash, and I know you're doing wonderful work in promoting public policy as a sort of career choice for young people. I think that's really what we need to do in India broadly. Yeah. I think part of that is what I have been doing through Center for Civil Society, which started in 1997. I heard that it was done well before you were born.
Yeah.
So it has been quite a while.
Yeah.
And then from CCS, of course, the ISPP sort of came about, right? I think if I look back on my own sort of personal journey, right, it seems to me that it started quite some time ago, when in my college years, or even high school.
Yeah.
So I remember I grew up in Gujarat. I remember in the Gujarati newspaper, I studied in Gujarati medium school actually at the time. Reading the newspaper, on the back of the newspaper almost every day, there will be a story of illicit liquor. And people dying.
Right.
So there is sort of small photograph of 5, 7, 10, 20, sometime more people dead, right? And the story would be small font story in the back of the paper.
Yeah.
And I kept seeing that almost every day.
Yeah.
And then I asked myself, why is that the case? What are we doing that so many people are dying on a daily basis?
Yeah.
And that was in a sense my first sort of, I guess, introduction to public policy.
Right.
So prohibition, that's as you know, in Gujarat.
Yeah.
Right? And that made me question some of the things that I began to see around me. Right? At that time, I was studying pharmacy. So it was a very different field.
Yeah.
I had never studied economics at that time because pharmacy is a science subject. Right? So we have this dichotomy, arts, science, and commerce.
Yeah.
So you do choose one discipline, you stay in that for the rest of your life. But then luckily for me, in the summer of one of the college holidays, a classmate of mine had books by Ayn Rand.
Okay.
Right? And he gave me one of the books to read, and I just found it so fascinating. I couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting, actually. And then I went back to him and said, do you have any more books? So he said, yes. So he showed me whole collection of books that he had written by Ayn Rand, right? So fiction and non-fiction both. And I just kept reading all of those books. And that really got me, two things it did for me. One was the fact that you as an individual could take a stand against the rest of the society. And since you are against the rest of society does not mean that you are somehow wrong or doing something which is unethical or irreverent, right? I think that was really a great eye-opener at that point in time in my life.
Yeah.
Right? That you could choose to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And you don't really have to abide by the customary norms of what people are thinking that you should do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that got me into sort of politics, economics, philosophy. Right? And that's how I think my journey sort of started. Slowly, I went to US after that, studied economics, was teaching economics there.
Yeah.
And I think, so that's the sort of way in which my sort of journey started as a person in this public policy domain.
Now that's fascinating. I think the idea of how career trajectories here have evolved. Maybe we'll come back to that part. But before that, I'd love to know, there's something, the Indian School of Public Policy, it's really created a buzz, right? In the broader policy circle, I often see not just young people, freshers out of college who want to study policy and say at an ISPP, we're sitting in the ISPP, beautiful ISPP campus right now here in New Delhi, but also people across the career spectrum, even senior folks who want to switch to policy, right? They're considering education here. Now, what were the foundational ideas behind setting up the Indian School of Public Policy? And more importantly, I would love to know, why now? Why not earlier, later? What was it that made you think that, okay, now's the time?
So, as I said, when I came back to India in 1997, that's when I started the Center for Civil Society.
Yeah.
When I came back, I thought that there will be at least a handful of people in India who would think from the way I was thinking about economics and politics and philosophy, and the like-minded people, and I'll be able to work with them, write sort of policy papers, challenging some of the government policies of the time, and thereby sort of see a larger policy change in the country. Of course, India already had gone through the 1991 reforms.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
process obviously had started.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a long way to go from what we did in 1991. To my surprise, I found there was hardly anyone I could work with. Right? Who I can work with, either hire them on the team or even from outside, who can write sort of policy analysis in a way that is understandable by common people,
Yeah.
and at the same time is sort of sound in his economics and philosophical arguments, right? And that's what sort of really eye-opener for me in a way. Almost 1 billion people, and there was hardly anybody that you can find who understood market liberal ideas, understood that philosophy, understood how that can be applied to public policy analysis. And so we decided that we would have to do programs on our own to create the soldiers to fight this intellectual battle, if you want to put it that way, right? And that's how the Liberty and Society seminar started, which is what CCS has been doing for a long time.
Yeah.
And so many of the people who came to that seminar actually became, after graduation, sort of team members of mine at CCS. So that's a great way to also recruit people who were like-minded, understood the philosophy, believed in the larger cause of what needs to be done. Right? And so at the 20th anniversary, to cut the long story short, of CCS, we asked all the stakeholders, okay, what has been the most meaningful work the CCS has done in 20 years? Right? We are doing, the academy was doing the training of high school and college students, and our research and advocacy team was doing the policy research and advocacy work in the various domains. And almost unanimous answer was that what you have been doing with college students has been the most fruitful thing. So many people have hired some of those graduates. They found that they actually had a very different way of thinking about things, very different perspective they brought to the table, right? And so that's how we thought that, okay, this is something that we have done well. Then maybe we should do it at a larger scale and maybe more systematically, as opposed to doing 3 to 5 day training programs. We do now a full-fledged training institution.
In fact, I'll add to that that my first ever brush with public policy was iPolicy. So the first time that I came to know of policy, that public policy as a field exists, it's a science, and the whole thing was when I came to Delhi for the first time in 2017 for iPolicy. But anyways, it's been a long time. Yes, just building on that part, right? So how have you seen the policy space evolve over 3 decades, right? Especially from the perspective of careers, right? I think because earlier it was mostly that you give UPSC and work in sort of a administrative sort of role. How have you seen that change in 3 decades almost?
Quite a substantial change. So I remember when I was in school and college, when you ask somebody, no, I want to do something for the country, what should I do? The most common answer would be go to the villages of India, because that's where the people of India live, right? So the common story that if you do something for the country, you have to go to the village. And obviously that wasn't a very attractive proposition for me, right? I said, and I think it started that way. Now I think we have come a long way from those days. We understand many ways in which you can participate in nation building, right? As you mentioned, UPSC has been one of the sort of very well-trodden paths for many people over the decades, right? But now I think is also the public policy as a career path, as a full-time profession, right, has opened up, right? And that's really, I think, is a way of sort of attracting more people who are interested in working for the nation, and also giving them a sort of a sounder understanding of how do you, one, keep your own biases at bay, be able to understand what the problems are, what's the evidence is telling you, and how do you then customize solutions to those problems, and looking from the eye of the citizen particularly, right? So I think that kind of training is going to be very useful, and that's really what we are trying to do at ISPP. I think we realized, as I told you about CCS 20th anniversary, and we asked that question. We also sort of realized that now there is a growing demand. We have been working with the government, so I remember whenever we go to the meeting with the secretary in any of the ministries, the person sitting at the table taking notes of the meeting, sending us an email back after the meeting to remind what has been discussed, what are the next action steps, right? All of that work is not done by a civil servant. Right? It's done by a consultant who is hired by the ministry. So you can see that there was a lot more influx of people from outside, and must be necessary for the government to perform its role. And we thought if we had public policy people in the same role, they would do far better job of informing the civil
Absolutely.
servants
Yeah.
about what choices they have, how to think about public policy problems, and maybe use evidence
Yeah.
in making those decisions.
Yeah.
So I think that's really what made us feel that now this is the right time to do something like ISPP.
That's a very valid point, Parth. In fact, if I can just quickly add to that, I've personally seen an explosion of jobs in the private sector as well, right now. And the phrase that we use here, Sarkar Samaj Bazaar, right? So in Bazaar and in Samaj as well. So the society has really expanded non-profits, NGOs, deaf sector organizations, social entrepreneurship, and then like I worked at Twitter for a couple of years, right? Most large firms have policy teams now. Startups have policy teams, right? And even in advocacy comps. So really an explosion of that. Now, okay, this is one question I am asking just so that I make my job easier because so many people keep asking me this, which is most public policy programs in this country today are 2-year degrees, right? ISPP is probably the only one which A is based out of New Delhi, that's one thing, but also offers a 1-year sort of a postgraduate program, right? What was the thought process behind that, and does it really offer any strong benefits to anyone who's pursuing education as a scholar?
Very good question. I think, as you said, we also get asked the same question every time we talk about ISPP. And I think we did think a lot when we were starting out, okay, what kind of program we want to design, how long it should be, right? And we talked to a lot of people. So Luis Miranda and I both actually went to meet people in abroad, even talking to them to understand what's going on outside, what has been their learning in this policy space, what is it that they think would be appropriate for India, right? So looking at all of those things, it became clear to us that you could do in 1 year what is normally being done in 2 years.
Right.
Because in most places, the second year usually is not really that much coursework. You may have 1 or 2 courses. It's mostly about doing your capstone project or a consultancy project or an internship. Different terms are used. But 6 to 8 months are spent doing that, right? And we thought that that's on the job training that can be done also without doing internship in the college. You can actually be working outside and get that training, right? And so we thought that if you can do 1 year program, right, it would do one important thing for the students in India. It would reduce their opportunity cost, right? Because 1 year saved,
absolutely,
right, it means 1 year of what you have earned,
learning and earning both,
that you would not have to lose, right? So that the kind of people we want to attract, not those who are able to go abroad, and many of course have been able to go abroad, but people who probably are not able to afford to go abroad but are very keen to pursue a career in public policy. So that will be constrained for them if you had 2 year program without really a good justification for the second year particularly, right? And therefore we thought that 1 year program is really a great thing. Yes, we would have to sort of put a lot more pressure. So it is frankly a rigorous, it's a very rigorous program. It is a very demanding program. We always get some complaints about that all the time because this is really taking up a lot of energy and time. But I thought, no, I mean, that's how the life is going to be, right? As a public policy professional, you would have to put in long hours because it's always going to be on the deadline. We need to get this done. We need to get it done, right? So I think 1 year program really made sense. And having done now 4 sort of batches, and the way we have seen the uptake in the job market, I think we have made a right decision about having a 1 year program.
Talk to me more about that. How has the response been to this course from employers, right? From people, from academicians who give feedback on the course, right? People who want to hire ISPP scholars. How has the response been? Because I think 3 batches have already graduated. Or this is the 3rd one?
Fourth one.
Fourth one, sorry, yes. With the 5th one to come. So how has the response overall been? What is the feedback you've gotten?
I think it's more than sort of surprise in some ways, right? Because we knew that there's a growing demand. We did not know how much that demand is. And obviously, how much people are willing to pay for it, right? Because of course, it's very important for people to also have a decent salary while working in this space, right? So we are quite surprised that we have had 100% placement record, right? So of course, we don't guarantee people a job when they come to ISPP.
But over the last few batches,
the historical record has been that we have been able to place everyone who wanted a job, who did not want to go abroad or do other things, right? So I think that's a really great satisfaction, that 100% record that we have. Secondly, I think average sort of pay package, right, has been almost close to the annual fee of ISPP.
Right?
So what that means is within a 1 year, you're able to recover at least the fees that you paid
investments,
for the program.
Yeah.
So I know, having talked to some of the MBA programs, right? They say that if you recover your fees in 2 years, that's a good benchmark,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So while at ISP you are able to recover in 1 year, so if that's even doing better than some of the top MBA programs do in the country,
Yeah.
right? So I think in both ways, in terms of the demand and variety of jobs that they are able to go to, and of course the pay package they are able to receive, I think both have been quite a pleasant surprise that there is a recognition of this need and people are willing to pay for those services.
That's amazing, and I think just to reiterate the fact that you say 1 full year, which you can invest in working and learning, that really matters a lot. Final question. And there's this meme also wanting to learn as an individual, as a professional who started a career here, that what will it be your final bit of advice to people who are looking to enter the public policy space, Parth, right? Build careers here. Like maybe if you can just guide us a bit on where do you see the space headed, right? In terms of where people can work, do meaningful sort of a thing. Any final bit of advice?
Well, I think one thing I'm really looking forward to, and I hope that some of the graduates of ISPP do this, is become a policy entrepreneur.
Right.
So not just looking for a job, of course, is important, and that may be a good training ground for the next step, as we know, right, to do a startup of your own. But I'm hoping that we bring that entrepreneurial energy in the curriculum, in the among the scholars, and help them to think about bigger challenges to take up, right?
Yeah.
So both in terms of being entrepreneur in policy domain, starting maybe their own consultancies, working as an independent sort of contractor with the government or even the private sector, right? Building a sort of their own track in how they can influence the larger domain of public policy. So I think that's maybe one of my first advice or request would be that think entrepreneurially, right? Public policy is not the government job, right?
Absolutely.
It's not really the only thing that government needs to do or policy people have to do on their own. It requires entrepreneurial mindset also.
Yeah.
I think in terms of learnings that I had, which I think probably to me seem quite relevant to what people need to do today in India, right? One learning is that most of the policy decisions are taken largely not on the basis of evidence, right? But largely on the basis of how people feel and think about the poor. So most programs and schemes are designed for people who are not doing well, right, in various ways. And therefore each policy person, including politician or the civil servant, right, who thinks about how to help them, right, has an image of that group of people. Right? And I find that the perception of the poor really drives most of the policy decision in the country, unfortunately. Right? And of course, people perceive the poor is that, oh, I know my driver or I know my maid's husband who drinks and takes away all the money from her, right? And so they have a sample of one. And from sample of one, they're able to, in a sense, generalize to say 500 million, 600 million people, how they would behave in a given situation, right? So I find that understanding of how people respond, what is their sense of their own agency and their own dignity, right? That I find is lacking. So we feel that we have agency. We are educated. Obviously, we are in public policy now, right? We have the dignity of standing on our own feet. But the other person is just looking for a handout, just looking for something to be done for them, right? I think that really is one of the core challenge in how people think and do public policy. So I hope that we are able to sort of slowly change that, right? I think evidence, of course, everybody talks about public policy based on evidence. So my sort of advice has been that evidence matters when you have an hypothesis. When you have made up your mind, evidence doesn't matter. Right? So you can collect data, you can ask people to give you research that has been done, but if your mind is not open, if your mind is not trained to hypothesize and think in terms of hypotheses, right? As opposed to conclusion, as opposed to suggestions, as opposed to solutions, right? You would not be able to use evidence. It may be sitting on the table, all you want, right? But it's not going to influence what you do and how you do it. Right? I think that really is a challenge because most people who come to public policy come with a very idealistic vision of what they want to achieve, how they want to help the country, right? And they already have very solid ideas, very concrete ideas about how they want to do it, right? Keeping them in the back of the mind and keeping the mind, so your thinking open, and saying, okay, I know in my heart what I think is true or good in this situation, but can I just hold it for a moment, think about what the right question I should be asking before this evidence that I have in front of me,
Yeah.
and how can the evidence help me to make a more informed judgment about what's good in this situation.
Yeah.
I think that kind of distance that you need to have between your own personal views and what the evidence is telling you.
Yeah.
And that way of thinking about in hypotheses as opposed to solutions.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a very important part of what I think hopefully ISPP is able to achieve.
I just constantly couldn't stop thinking about the fact that so much of this draws from what CCS has been trying to do, right? Free markets, libertarian ideology, right? The government, yes, but not like not an overbearing sort of a thing, and welfare state and all of it. This is a very, very helpful part. Thank you so much for joining us for the content today, for your time. I'm sure audience will find it very helpful, and we'll share all relevant links for ISPP, for Passport, for everything in our description. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Yash.